Chapter 16, wherein the prince neither bawls nor bellows. Jemmy felt a surge of the creeps. Run for it? He wondered. Instead, he began to burrow out of sight under the loose heap of potatoes. Remember, he whispered to the prince, it's me they're after, not you. Tell him we split up. Tell him I swam the river. Prince Brat nearly looked at him. The voices outside boomed. Stand and deliver, I said. And I heard you, exclaimed Captain Nips. Deliver what? Potatoes? Scurvy rascals? Help yourselves. Hang your potatoes, roared Hold-Your-Nose Billy. Deliver us some information and you can be off. We're after 2 runaway apprentices. Apprentice highwaymen? Captain Nips scoffed. Our affair. Girl with the bear said she saw 'em streaking for the river. You carry 'em, passengers. Jemmy pulled the iron kettle over his head. A coach door was yanked open and Jemmy could hear Cutwater's muffled cackle. Got one! The whipping boy it is. Where's your master, eh? Jemmy held his breath. He had no reason to believe that the prince wouldn't betray him again. There came a stiff pause, and then Prince Brat said, Swam the river! By then, Hold-Your-Nose Billy had ripped open the opposite coach door. Even through the kettle, Jemmy imagined he could smell garlic. Swimmed the river? Faugh! He'd need scales and fins! Hardly a moment later, the kettle was grabbed off and Jemmy's head stood exposed. Here's the potato we're after, Hold-Your-Nose Billy roared gleefully. Jemmy and the prince were yanked out of the coach, and the big outlaw shouted to Captain Nips, Throw me down your horsewhip and drive on. Hanging on to each boy by the scruff of their neck, the highwaymen scrambled out of sight below the embankment. Hold-Your-Nose Billy looked angry enough to throttle Jemmy on the spot. Tricked me, you did, he bellowed. Flummoxed me with your fancy quill scratching. The game's up, Jemmy thought. He's tumbled the ransom note ain't worth scrat. But, trying to look as innocent as possible, he replied, Sir? A gold sack or 2 would have satisfied me and Cutwater, snarled the hairy outlaw. Greedy ain't our middle name, but you, raising the ante to a great cartload, reckoned to slow us down, didn't you? It'd be easier to drag around a dead horse. If we ain't light-footed, we're caught. That was your scheme. What a pair of fools, Jemmy thought. That hadn't been his scheme at all. You've got it all wrong, he declared. I swear it. Aye, enough plunder to burden us directly to the gallows, eh? Hold-Your-Nose Billy continued. Well, here's a whipping you won't never forget. He snapped Captain Nips' whip in the air to get the feel of it. Here's the whipping boy, Cutwater put in. You said it'll go powerful worse for us if we thrash the prince himself. Hold-Your-Nose Billy nodded sharply. Cutwater upturned the prince, holding him by the ankles in the air. Go to it, Billy. Jemmy finally found his voice. Lay down the whip, he commanded with a princely air. Don't you have an ounce of sense between you? Hold your gab. Simpletons, you can't just fill your pockets with plunder and be light-footed as ever, Jemmy declared. Nobody flummoxes Hold-Your-Nose Billy and gets away with it. The whip snapped across the prince's back. Jemmy held his breath. He knew what it felt like. He saw that Prince Brat had set his jaws, just as Jemmy had always done, and not a sound escaped his lips. Harder, Cutwater advised. You didn't raise a peep out of him. The big man let the fly again. He must have a hide like an elephant, said Cutwater. He don't feel a thing. He'll feel this. Hold-Your-Nose Billy thundered, and the leather whistled through the air. The prince's jacket was being shredded. Ball out, Jemmy shouted. He dreamed of seeing the prince whipped, but now that it was happening, he found no satisfaction in it. Holler and cry out, I won't tell anyone. But Prince Brat only girded himself for the next blow. From the top of the embankment came an outraged voice. Betsy and her dancing bear stood there. Ruffian, she cried out. What are you doing to that poor boy? No business of yours, snarled Cutwater. Stop it! But Hold-Your-Nose Billy raised the whip again. The next thing Jemmy knew, the girl had slipped the rope from around the bear's neck. Sick 'em, Petunia! Go get 'em! Chapter 17. Petunia to the rescue. The bear came snarling down the embankment. Rising on its hind legs, it bared its teeth and bellowed out a thunderclap of a roar. Cutwater, dropped the prince, and was off like a greyhound. Hold-your-nose Billy, his eyes round as snowballs, went charging off into the river. He raised a great splash, and if he didn't know how to swim, he learned instantly. Jemmy had reared back, but now Betsy gave a whistle, and the bear stopped in its tracks. "Good boy, Petunia. That'll do, darlin'." She slipped the rope back on the bear's neck. Then she bent over the prince. "The low-down bullies, laying stripes on a boy's back." With the bear sniffing him, Prince Brat didn't move a muscle. "Rein in your beast," he whispered stiffly. "Oh, don't be afraid of Petunia. Gentle as a kitten, he is. Here, let me tend to your poor hide." "No." "Give us a look." "Thank you, no," the prince exclaimed. "Lummy, ain't you the brave one? Must sting something dreadful." Jemmy watched the prince slowly raise himself off the mud flat. He felt a growing amazement. Prince Brat a brave one? It didn't seem possible, but gah, there was a cast-iron streak of pluck in him. The prince moved his arms and shoulders. He winced, but then began to brush himself off. "Steady your legs," Jemmy asked. "Steady." "You should have yelled and bellowed. That's what they wanted to hear." "And humble myself?" muttered the prince. "You never did." Jemmy gazed at him for a thoughtful moment. Then he indicated the two highwaymen. Cutwater had vanished, and Hold-your-nose Billy was trying to keep from drowning. "Let's be on our way. They'll sure be back for us." "Not if you travel with me," said Betsy. "Me and Petunia." Jemmy found a horse-whip where Hold-your-nose Billy had dropped it. Betsy and the bear had already started up the embankment, and the boys followed. "Lawks," whispered Jemmy. "Ain't we a puckered sight, the both of us? Torn up and scruffy. At least no one will take you for a prince." Not far off lay the coach on its side. "Hanged if I caught sight of that steep rise off the side of the road," Captain Nips explained. "Dipped us over, as you see." "Either your horses need spectacles," said Betsy, "or you do." Together with Petunia, they lifted and pushed and righted the coach. They piled in and were off. Betsy and her dancing bear rode inside with the prince. Jemmy decided to sit with Captain Nips to watch for road hazards. They reached the city without further incident, except for being stopped by soldiers. The king's men were clearly looking for the vanished prince, but when a bear poked its head out the window, the soldiers stepped back and quickly waved the coach on.